President Emmanuel Macron wants to transform Islam in France to an Islam of France. He wants to better integrate Muslims into the population and counter religious extremism. France has experienced multiple terror attacks in the last 2 years, inspired by or affiliated with Daesh. Can a balance be found between religious freedom and integration, or will Macron only deepen divisions? This is Roundtable with me, Shuli Ghosh. For over a century, France has been a secular society, keeping religion and politics separate. So how will President Macron marry Islam with French ideals without stirring up feelings of prejudice and discrimination? Will his efforts to create a national brand of Islam only deepen divisions?
France's president is trying to bridge two subjects once considered too impolite for dinner-time conversation: politics and religion. Setting his sights on the Muslim faith, Emmanuel Macron wants to transform Islam in France to an Islam of France. It's thought a French style would better integrate the Muslim population and counteract religious extremism. But France is a nation that values secularism. Should France have its own version of Islam? And can a president and politician reorganize a religion while maintaining the separation between church and state? Macron took office after France's worst terror incidents: the massacre at satirical newspaper Charlie Hebdo, the attacks in Paris, and truck ramming on Bastille Day in Nice. Since 2015, more than 230 people have been killed in terror attacks. They were carried out mostly by French or European nationals affiliated with or inspired by Daesh. The violence spurred anti-Islamic sentiment, and a perception a poorly integrated Muslim population is a security concern. Muslims too are wary a French version of Islam is veiled prejudice and another way to stifle religious expression. They cite bans on the full face veil in public, headscarves in schools, or the infamous burkini ban during the summer of 2016. Each time, debate has raged over religious freedoms and discrimination versus safety, integration, and France's secular code. The Republic formally separated church and state over a century ago. Keeping religion out of politics has been a governing force ever since.
Il y a beaucoup de polémiques, il y a beaucoup de controverses, il y a beaucoup de questionnements sur la place de la religion musulmane dans la société française et la question de sa compatibilité avec les valeurs et les lois de la République. Et ceci fait très très mal aux musulmans.
There are also signs of more tolerance. In a recent poll, 56% of people felt Islam is compatible with French values. In 2016, 56% thought it wasn't. Macron has been consulting widely on ways to harmonise Islam with French ideals and sideline any violent interpretations of the faith.
Personne ne peut faire croire que votre foi n'est pas compatible avec la République.
By redrawing the relationship between France's Muslims and the Republic, Macron wants to marry Islam with French identity and values. State attempts to manage a religion also risk its secular neutrality. Is a French version of Islam just a facade for Islamophobia? And will efforts to foster unity only alienate those who feel forced to choose between being French or being Muslim?
So joining us for this discussion from Paris is Yasser Louati, co-founder of the Committee of Justice and Liberties for All, an anti-racism campaign group. In New York is journalist Karina Piser, who's written about French secularism. In the studio with me is Nacira Guenif-Souilamas, an anthropologist and sociologist who's researched and spoken on structural racism in France, and Philippe Marliere, professor of French and European politics at University College here in London. Good to have all of you with me. Let me start with my guests in the studio. So, Nacira, this idea of a French version of Islam, Macron says his priority is to bring back what secularism is all about. But this is not a new idea, is it?
No, actually, I don't think that there's anything new about the relation between France and Islam. It's just about moving away from a colonial Islam that has been very useful to the French Empire, colonial empire, and move on to a French society that accommodates and accepts fully the French Muslim citizens. And this is, I guess, what Macron is trying to address. The only point is that maybe he's just paying lip service to that, because he doesn't have the means so far to implement anything that has to do with really accommodating Islam in the French society.
He's paying lip service to who? To
the Muslim community, and also maybe to the wider and the French society at large, by trying to cool down a lot of hot issues that are on the table for the past half century, and trying to maybe avoid and divert and play diversion about what is really at stake in France, which is the fact that minorities, especially the Muslim religious minority, is not accepted in the French society. So
I mean, and it's not just France. Muslim communities have a problem throughout Europe. Is this about reaching out to Muslim communities, or are there other factors at stake? For example, the huge focus on security in France right now.
For sure, security plays a part. I think Macron will probably, and I think he's been already developing and also strengthening a set of measures which had been implemented. There's a sort of under President Hollande in that respect. But I think clearly there's an issue that's an ongoing issue, and I agree with Nacira on that. That clearly we've been there before. President Sarkozy in his time was also trying to sort of address the similar issues, to integrate Islam. I think, again, each time it falls short of really addressing the real issues, which is discrimination, segregation.
Some draconian laws have been brought in. You know, mosques have been closed, some imams have been expelled. So it seems to be going side by side with that growing focus on security as well as integration.
Absolutely. You might wonder to what extent security might be a pretext, really, to, again, monitor ever more closely the Muslim population in France. I think it's been like that since, the Charlie Hebdo killings, very probably, again, taken as a pretext. Again, it's ironic to note that, as your clips showed, that France is officially a laïque, secular country where the church and religions are separated, but there's always this attempt on the part of the French state really to interfere and regulate. Not any religion, because most religions, most important religions in France, are really let free to do whatever they want, almost.
Except
of course,
Islam.
Except Islam, where always they have to prove that they're really in line with French laws, with French culture.
And there was, by the way, there was this attempt that was made by creating out of scratch this French Council of Muslim cults, which is a sort of a French church regarding Islam. I mean, it's a way of replicating something that is at the core of the French culture, which is a church by itself.
Well, let me bring in Yasser, because I know you are not a fan of this at all, Yasser.
Well, to say the least, I am absolutely not. First, we have to go back to the colonial period during which laicity was applied on mainland France, but not in French Algeria, meaning that the church was free in France, but when Algerian Muslims sought to have their autonomy thanks to laicity, the French colonial administration denied them that right. And we see ongoing attempts to keep the Islamic religion and the Muslim communities under control in clear violation of the so-called secular law. But here Emmanuel Macron is actually perpetuating and widening the problem of security. First, the ideology of Daesh was not born in France or in French mosques. It's a foreign ideology born wherever Western powers are militarily involved. And nobody wants to address that, as if the so-called radicalization problem happens in a vacuum. The second point is that by attempting to create a so-called French brand of Islam, the French government itself has to stop this hypocrisy by first claiming that Muslims have to pledge allegiance to the French Republic, while the French government is bringing in foreign imams who keep Islam in the box of a foreign religion. And bringing foreign imams is actually part of the problem because they may be good in reading the texts or teaching specific topics, but they have no knowledge whatsoever about French society. And today, Emmanuel Macron is, as Ms. Nacira said, just playing lip service to actually say he's doing something. But the core of the issue right now is that we hear a lot about creating a French brand of Islam, or etc. But the first population, Muslims themselves, don't exist. It's as if we are constantly deciding for them what's good for them and constantly telling them you are not smart enough.
Let's take the issue of the foreign interference. Karina, I know you've written extensively on this. You've spoken to Muslim communities as well. This idea of cutting off foreign interference from mosques and home training imams in France rather than bringing in foreign imams. Is that something that would A, make Muslim Islam more moderate in France, and B, is it something that Muslim communities themselves want to see?
I think there's a couple of kind of problems with the way that we think about this. The idea of fostering a moderate Islam is vague and consistently undefined by the government, even though the government continues to refer to this moderate Islam, this moderate French Islam would be fostered. There's on the one hand this idea that there's a foreign Islam that is coming through and converting Muslims to, or not converting them, but influencing them in some form of radical Islam.
All right, Karina, let's pick up this thought here in the studio, that the fear is that without some kind of reorganization, that there is a fertile breeding ground for radicalization in French mosques, that there is this influence from abroad. It is a fact that several hundred, I think something like 1,700 French nationals have gone from France to join Daesh in Iraq and Syria. So is there a problem, and can it be addressed this way?
Yeah, there is a problem, but 700 people with regard to from 3 million to 6 million Muslims. 1,700, but even
so yes, it's a minority.
It's a minority, and because of this minority that has also been created by the French society, it's not something, you know, it's not some otherness that comes from outside, from without, and has created itself as radicalized in France. These are people who were homegrown. These are people who expected at some point to belong to the French society and were denied this kind of right. They were always considered as second-rate citizens from the beginning, being racially segregated, being given less opportunity in schooling system, less opportunity to access work and the regular life in France. So let's not forget.
The problem was because they never fit into society.
It's the French roots of radicalization. And so, of course, they turn to something else. They turn to another kind of experience. They turn to another way to give sense to the world they were in and to their own lives. And because of that, France cannot just say it's a matter, it's for the sake of the French security that we need finally, eventually, to accommodate Islam in France. This is something, what do you say to that? It's quite a problem.
Let's have Yasser first and then Philippe.
I mean, first we have a problem with the word radicalization, and to quote the government itself, they admit that the word was adopted under the pressure of current events. It has not been defined. Like, for example, you mentioned 1,700 French citizens who left France to Syria, but how about the white nationalists who joined the Ukrainian battlefield, or other citizens who joined the Israeli army? Do we call that radicalization or not? Or does radicalization only apply to Muslims? And again, nobody asks the question of the why. Why do these kids live? And why do we want to keep them outside? And for example, some of them are being right now prosecuted in Iraq. How about bringing them back home to interrogate them and understand better the process that has led to them going abroad? But coming back to our main topic of the show today, what's the relationship between the emergence of a French Islam and the so-called radicalization as said by the government? So we are trying to answer one question with the wrong answer. First, the government, why these kids live, and second, Are you going to speak directly to Muslims and ask them for the solution they can bring forward to tackle societal questions?
When you have a former prime minister in France, Manuel Valls, who is a hardliner in this debate, really a partisan, really of sort of, I would say, the complete invisibility of Muslims and Islam in French society, someone who makes on regular basis what you would label, Islamophobic statements, with, of course, no problem as far as this is concerned, saying, I think it was a couple of years ago, that France, in the suburbs of France, there is an apartheid, a socio-ethnic apartheid. In fact, admitting the failure of the so-called Republican model of integration. I mean, he said it. Of course, he tried to backtrack afterward because his own side was particularly unhappy about that, but he said it. So clearly there is an issue which is never addressed.
Mentality with French politicians. You've got the Interior Minister, Gérard Collomb, saying that we are in a state of war with jihadists. There seems to be this mindset that, unless French Islam is an extremely tolerant, extremely moderate form of Islam, then there is that they are a security risk and need to be managed in some way. There does seem to be that attitude.
I think you can, of course, talk at length about racism in French society, which is a fact, but I think it becomes clear to me and to a lot of people, observers, that Islam, Muslim, the question of the hijab, for instance, which is really a very vexing issue in French society, have become a kind of political football in the wider political debate in France. It is used by people like Collomb, like Valls, and so many other politicians, a way really to distract, as a kind of smokescreen, to distract from the failures, first of all, economic, social, as we were saying earlier, but also as a way always to get back to a kind of an enemy from within, which would be the Muslim population. And that's also a way, finally, not to discuss and address the real issues in French society.
Interesting stuff.
Which is interesting is the fact that France created its own enemy, internal enemy. France created Muslims as such. And this takes place every day in classrooms, at the workplace, in the public sphere. People are targeted as Muslims, and at the very moment they are targeted as Muslims, they are created as Muslims. Nobody is supposed to see anything else than their Muslimness, which is a problem in a laïc society, as we were saying. And this is something that is internal to the French process and dynamics today.
Do you agree with that, Karina? Do Muslim communities, and I know they're very diverse, we're talking about them as if they're just one group, but actually there are many different Muslim communities. In France, do they feel alienated? Do they feel they're not being listened to in terms of what they want?
I think there's, on a number of levels, a certain degree of frustration. As you said, the Muslim population in France is extremely diverse. I'm sure that the other people on the show right now can attest to that. I've done a lot of research, particularly in schools, in public high schools and middle schools, and I've interviewed a number of young Muslim women who are affected, for example, by the law on headscarves in the classroom. And there is a sentiment of frustration and feeling that in order to integrate or in order to become part of the classroom, they do have to leave this integral part of themselves at home.
There was this, and Nacira, you referred to this, this idea of the French Council of the Muslim Faith, which was created by Nicolas Sarkozy when he was the Interior Minister. That was supposed to speak for France's 6 million Muslims, which is a tall order. But is that idea, at least, the idea to give them a voice, appoint a grand imam who can be their representative in France, is that a good idea at all?
No, it was not. It was not. Actually, it was Jacques when with the leftist government in the 80s that started the idea of this kind of council. But I think it's too much drawn on the French church to have any kind of effect. And as a matter of fact, today, when you look and when you speak to Muslims in France, especially the younger generation, they do not have any kind of identification with these old men. Most of them coming from the former colonies, from the countries of their parents, who do not have any kind of understanding of their cultural life, of the way they are being hybridized. They are not just Muslims, there are many other things. And there is a total disconnection between the CFCM And the younger French generation.
Which is something that Macron recognises. He wants to reform it or replace it.
I mean,
Yasser, I mean, is it? But what does anyone think about the idea of? Because we're talking about Muslims having a voice, Muslims having an opinion, and having a say in how, because presumably they don't want to be associated with young disaffected men who are going off to join Daesh. It's a problem for the Muslim community as well.
It is a problem. It is. I mean, like, again, it's a top-down approach, and nobody is seeking advice from Muslims themselves.
Right.
Here we have Emmanuel Macron, the president of a secular republic, saying, "You Muslims will be represented by an organization that I will set up in my headquarters at the Élysée Palace or in Matignon with the Prime Minister." Again, how about setting up a platform for the diversity of Muslims to express themselves and have some kind of convergence of ideas towards a more representative organization? We have to remember that Muslims come from various backgrounds. They come from Northern Africa, Sub-Saharan Africa, some of the Middle East, the Comoro Islands, Asians, converts, men, women. And again, the model is that even the French government itself is only interactive with male coming from overseas, and not, for example, men and women, blacks and whites, born Muslims and converts who can actually voice some kind of ideas to the president. My fear is that we are again normalizing colonial practices and keeping Muslims in the box of the religion that must be kept under control. For example, again, addressing security issues with the reformation of so-called Islam, we never hear similar rhetoric.
It's the wrong answer to a right question.
If I may prolong this point, I think clearly the sort of the line is, let's give Muslims in France a voice. But I don't think that's what successive governments and presidents are interested in. In fact, what they want is a bunch of yes men in place. Yeah. And clearly it's very condescending, always condescending. I think it's always the Republic and the governments of France knowing what's best for the Muslims. And I think you see that again on the sort of debate on hijab. People know better than the woman wearing the hijab what's best for them.
And it's sexist and racist at the same time. I mean, this is how the French debate about Islam has been going on for like 20 years now, if not longer. It is completely under the influence of a sexist and racist, essentialized view of Islam in France. And there's no way out so far of this.
So how do you change that perception of Islam in France without the help of the Muslim community?
You can't. And the point is that if the French state is not able to understand that Muslims now have a voice, they have a way of thinking, they can have a point of view on their society, on the world, on what's going on, including
terrorism. But isn't that what Macron's trying to do, to give them a voice by appointing this kind of
No, because he's using an electorate that gave him their voice and their vote. But this is not, he should expand the scope of his interest towards Muslims, and especially to those who are politicized, who are fighting structural racism that they are facing on a daily basis. And this is not what he's heading to.
What is to be done, simply to start with, you change the narrative politically. I think you recognize that France is a multicultural society, which no one in power would dare to say, multiculturalism being a sort of dirty word. And that's the strength of France. It's a young country, it's a multicultural, multi-ethnic country, but no one wants to see it. It's a complete invisibility to it due to that Republican ideology, and I think which does harm the nation in all. You need someone to come up with a kind of appeasing and inclusive narrative. The trouble is, and so far Macron hasn't delivered yet, may never deliver on that.
He will never deliver on it.
Yes, maybe we shall see. Let's give him the benefit of the doubt. We need someone to break that narrative, which is wrong, which is the idea is basically at the moment, France is a laic country, it's a republican country. We're all equal before the law, no matter your background, ethnic, religious, cultural. But of course, that's a myth, because of course, differences are not acknowledged, discriminations are not acknowledged, and of course, they persist.
Okay, so last thought, I suppose, is how much is the French government and Macron being pushed into this by public perceptions because of the string of security attacks we've had, and this rise of a sort of right-wing Europe where Muslim communities feel like they are being marginalised and not listened to. Karina?
I think sometimes it's difficult to see whether or not what the state does drives public opinion or whether or not the state's actions are driven by public opinion. I think it's clear that at large in French society, there is a lot of concern for security. Whether or not the way that the state and the media talks about Islam and Muslims is actually relevant to the security debate, I think it's kind of another question. There probably is a lot of public appetite to have the state take a stronger hand on Islam. What that means and what that should look like, I'm not sure if the public has a strong understanding or a strong opinion on how that would unfold. And I'm not entirely sure whether Macron's government does either. He was supposed to announce more concrete measures by now. He had announced 6 months ago that he was going to undertake this process of restructuring. And we still haven't seen much, so.
I suppose the big question is, in the end, whether there's any way to manage a religion in a way that serves political goals and doesn't alienate these communities themselves. Thank you very much indeed for joining me for this discussion. Good to have you on board for that. And thank you for watching. Until next time, that's it from me, Shuli Ghosh. Bye for now.